Hey everybody, Mr. Wagstaff here. All right, cool stuff to talk about today. So yesterday we talked about the first English colony of the lost colony of Roanoke that was a failure because everybody just disappeared. Then we had talked about the Spanish Armada being defeated in 1588, allowing England, if they so choose, to come set up colonies in the New World. All right, so that's where we are. So, unlike France, or specifically unlike Spain, who sent over their government, their conquistadors, to wreck shop here in the New World to bring back stuff for the crown, England is kind of taking a hands-off approach on this one. They're like, I don't really see any motivation for doing things weirdly. England doesn't have a desire to come over here themselves and take anything. There's no real belief that there is a bunch of benefit to England in the first few years after the Spanish Armada is defeated. So what ends up happening is there is a group called the Virginia Company, which is a joint stock company that is going to be the one that is going to try to develop a permanent colony in the New World. All right, so that's where we're going to pick up at today. Put myself up here in the corner. So a joint stock company is a private company in England, all right? It is not owned by the crown. Now, everything that happens in England has to get permission to do it, all right? So they have permission to do this, but it's not actually owned by the crown, meaning not owned by the government in England. So the joint stock company is where a group of people get together and they invest money in the hopes that they're going to make more money by investing it. All right. So there's a little cartoon here, and let me move myself off the screen here so you can see it. So here's how a joint stock company is supposed to work. So this is the logic in England when they're trying to develop a joint stock company. So this guy here says, I have called you all here to speak with you. I was wondering if you would like to make some money. All right. And you're like, maybe. He says, we will each buy. There's a little typo here. We'll each put in a share to buy a ship and supplies. So we'll all put in, we'll buy a ship and supplies. Go to the new land and bring back raw materials, aka gold. And then these two guys are like, are there any risk? We would like to know before giving you our money. And this guy says, there is a risk that we could get lost on the way, or something could happen to the boat or the crew. You might lose the share you put in, but if we make it back, then you will make 6 times more of the money that you put in. So it's like gambling, that there's a chance that you could lose everything. But if it goes well, you're going to make a ton of money. So this guy's like, well, more money, I'm in. I will put in $500. My friend that came with me will put in $600. You have to put in $500. So they clearly have sailed to this new land. And it says, the crew came with the ship and took sail to the New World. They landed at the New World a few months later and went and start to work finding raw materials. The crew started chopping down trees and mining. After gathering all the raw materials, they set back off for England. The 3 men became a joint stock company and started a capitalist company. So they get back here and this guy says, see boys, we are rich and started this capitalist joint stock company along the way. We can continue doing this and make more money. And this guy's thinking, I'm glad I did this. I got more money out of it after just starting with $600, right? So capitalist is the idea that you put money in and you make money, right? That you can become very wealthy by investing in stuff. So these group of guys, right, and this is what a joint stock company is. The Virginia Company, this is their logic. It does not go nearly as smooth as this cartoon went. So there's a bunch of rich people that are going to put into the joint stock company, and they're going to sell over to the New World and try to create a new colony, and they're expecting to make a lot of money because they're like, surely there's gold around there. Like, nobody's been here, like near the Roanoke area. Surely there's a bunch of gold there. So there's this belief that they're going to come over here, get a whole bunch of gold, and then go back and be filthy rich. Now, not all the investors, like here these two guys went, not all the investors are going to go. The vast majority of the investors aren't going to go. They're just going to wait for it to get back and then just make their money. So they're not actually going, but they're going to they're still going to make the money if they invested in it. So That's a joint stock company. So from the very beginning, the colonies over here, or people are here looking for money. They're willing to take financial risk to make a profit. That is capitalism. So it's kind of interesting that America, who really commits to being one of the first capitalist countries on earth, successful one, I should say, that the very first permanent colony, Jamestown, spoiler alert, is kind of set up in a capitalistic field. Funny enough, it ain't going to work out well financially for them with the Virginia Stock Company. Another spoiler, but let's talk about that. All right. So, number 12, how did the joint stock companies create an early capitalistic feel to what is present-day America? What was the main goal, responsibility of their American colonies? All right, so the second part here, all right, because we'd already talked about that first part of the question. The goal is to make money, right? And they're expecting to find gold. They think they're going to come over here and there's going to be gold all over the place, and all the people from the Virginia company, this joint stock company, are going to be super rich. So they are going to come over here and they're going to create a company called, or create a colony called Jamestown. All right. So let me show you where Jamestown is. So Roanoke Island, the lost colony that we had talked about yesterday, it's right here in what is present-day North Carolina. All right, the whole region is called Virginia. The Virginia Company is named after Queen Elizabeth. All right, who was everybody likes to, whoever's in charge in theory, or you'll be beheaded. But since she never married, she's referred to as the Virgin Queen. Which, how true that is, that's all hearsay. So that's what Virginia is in honor of Queen Elizabeth. So the whole massive area is called Virginia at the time because they're like, we're the first ones here. Ignore the millions of natives that live there. We're the first ones here. And then they name everything Virginia. That's why the Virginia Stock Company is also named after her. So they show up here, all right, little further north of Roanoke, and they set up a colony called Jamestown. They bring in 144 men, but it's just men and boys. There's no women involved here, all right? So, not surprisingly, they're going to have some beef with the natives, mainly because when the natives see people show up without any women, that they're coming to fight. Like, they're not sitting here to settle down. So, Jamestown, unlike a lot of the other colonies we'll talk about here, unlike Roanoke, these guys showed up to make money, and these guys aren't really planning on staying forever. Now, Jamestown, they're expecting to stay, but these guys will just be a revolving door of workers that show up. So when they show up, they actually show up in the fall. This is the dumbest possible time to show up because you can't grow anything, all right? But the Virginia Company's like, it'll be fine, all right? When you show up, we're just going to keep sending you ships of supplies. All we want you guys to do is go find all that gold and be shipping it back. Now, the joint stock company, the Virginia Company, doesn't have unlimited money, all right? They have to be getting some gold back so that they can load these ships with supplies to ship back out to Jamestown to keep them alive so they can get more gold. So this is 100% focused on them getting gold. Like the Virginia Company, if it's not gold, it'll be silver, some natural resource, something that's in the dirt, all right? So there's very little growing of anything that is here. So this is not good because, spoiler alert, I don't know if you've ever been out in the region that here in North Carolina or in Virginia, there's not a bunch of gold laying around. Never has been. They don't find any gold. This is a really bad way of starting because if there's no gold and everything is dependent on gold, bad things can happen. All right. So just realized that my face wasn't here on the screen, so I've been doing all my hand gestures and y'all didn't see it. I'm sorry. I'm sure y'all missed this beautiful, glorious, model-esque face. All right. So here is more. Let me see. Put myself out of here. All right. So this is Jamestown. It's here. You see all these freshwater rivers. We're going to start talking about some beef they're going to have with some Indians here. All these freshwater rivers have Native Americans on it. When they settle here in Jamestown, All right. They're like, yes, we found this great location, this little island in the middle of this freshwater river, and there's no natives on it. Oh, it's a great defensive position, which it is. All right. And all the Indians look at them like, why would you do that? Because they're showing up in the fall. So all of this water here is fresh water and flows down, and this turns into salt water. All right. Depending on the time of the year, sometimes this water is drinkable the whole time. When they settle here at Jamestown, this water is drinkable. In the middle of the summer, it gets called what's called brackish, which is like half salt and half water, and it's like impossible to drink without doing something to it, and it'll make you really sick. So this is why the natives never settled on this island. So when the English show up, they're like, we have this fantastic island. Why would nobody live here? And the Indians are like, what is wrong with them? They know when it gets summertime, they're just going to like get really sick and die if they don't fix their water. So from the beginning, the planning ahead was limited. Here is a poster for anybody that wanted to come over at the time. And it says, offering the most excellent fruits by planting in Virginia. Exciting, exciting, all such will be well affected and further the fame. So they're like, all right, who wants land? Because, obviously they want gold, but the gold needs to come back, and they're like, who wants land? They're looking for the primogeniture people, all right? And who wants glory? So they're trying to go for all the, the different ones. Here in Jamestown, these guys aren't really showing up for religious freedom. This is a small group. It ends up being important because it's the one that will stick barely. But the original group, these guys are showing up to work, to fight, to find gold. And so this very first group is not showing up for religious freedom. All right. So, why was searching for gold rather than farming a bad way to start a colony? Well, because you'll die, because you don't have any food. And they're going to learn that real early on. So an extremely famous person at the time, a guy named John Smith, comes across. Now, John Smith's story in itself is unique. So John Smith, he's like a fighter. He's more like a warrior type, I guess. Very strong, dominant personality. So he comes over to 3 original ships to set up Jamestown. On the way over here, he gets arrested for treason, I guess for trying to overthrow a ship or something, and gets locked into in prison on his way over here. Now, when John Smith gets over here, he's going to be executed. The captain's already made that decision. John Smith's going to be executed, hanging, whatever. I guess they just didn't want to throw him overboard. The Virginia Company makes a lot of these rules. So when they get over here, interesting, and I think this is I like this part of the story. So there are leaders on the boat, and there are workers, and everybody has a job, all right? However, it's super secret when they come over. And the reason it is super secret when they come over is you don't want like all the leaders on the boat to be like, I'm a leader, I don't have to do anything. And then all the workers just kill them, and then they get over here and they have the leaders. So who's in charge of Jamestown is a big secret until you get here. All right. So once they get here and they have John Smith, like, let's go ahead and execute him. Like, let's open up the sealed envelope to tell you who everybody else is here before we start killing people. They open it up. Guess who's in charge? John Smith. And John Smith's like, cool. I'm not really sure how much John Smith knew what his job would be. Maybe they keep it a secret from them. But when they got over here, so John Smith does not get executed. He's actually the guy in charge. So John Smith in American history is given this, like, without John Smith, everybody dies. That's true. I will give him credit for that, absolutely. Without John Smith, Jamestown doesn't survive. John Smith, though, isn't necessarily a good guy. He is, to say a massive jerk, is an understatement, especially to the Native Americans. When I say jerk, I should say bully. He is an absolute bully to the Native Americans, and in a really jerk fashion. Like, even more so than just your typical version. So John Smith shows up. They realize that there is, not only do they not have time to grow anything, but they're all starving. So he comes out real early on and uses this idea of work or starve. Because there's some rich people who showed up who expected to just do some paperwork stuff here or there to count the gold when it comes in. Well, none of the gold's coming in. So these guys who thought they were going to do like bureaucracy stuff, he's like, nah, we have a very limited amount of food. If you want us to give you this food, you're going to be working as well as everybody else. So he is a very dominant, very powerful leader. People are afraid of him. He'd be like the best fighter around. So he absolutely rules with an iron fist. He desperately tries to go get help from the Native Americans. See, it was kind of odd. So when they show up, they like build a fort. All right, and a very standoffish, like it's a military installation. So it doesn't start out with a lot of trust between the Indians that are looking across. They're like, what is wrong with these people? There's a little bit of drama early on. There's no attempt at all by the colonists here, I'll call them colonists, by the colonists to learn anything about the Native Americans. They just immediately viewed them as savages, like just these vicious animals that live out here in the wilderness that'll kill you the first chance they get. And when you treat them like that, all right, and you just kill them when you see them, hostilities arise. So from the beginning, these two groups had some issues. So basically, John Smith landed in Jamestown in the middle of a kingdom. So there's a whole bunch of Indian tribes, but there's like one Indian tribe that controls them all, and the guy's name is Powhatan. So it's actually called the Powhatan Indians, and the leader is called Powhatan. All right, because he changes his name when he becomes the leader. They didn't all change their race to anyway. So Powhatan is the leader, and it is also the name of the Indian tribes. So John Smith starts going out, and he if they can go out and they can find corn and stuff, they just steal it. They just take it from the Indians. They have guns and all this other stuff, but there's not enough food to go around, and they really start to struggle. The Virginia Company tries to send in a ship and it sinks. This happens multiple times. It's just absolutely ridiculous. So everybody's like about to starve to death, and they get really close. There's a lot of diseases, all types of dumb stuff taking place. So John Smith is going to venture out to try to find food. John Smith gets captured. All right. John Smith gets captured by the Powhatan Indians, and they transport him further into what is present-day Virginia, and he actually meets with Powhatan. I put this picture up here so I can tell you the story. This entire picture is fake. Famous story, fake. Which is actually kind of odd that this actual story takes place inside a building. The fake story actually takes place inside a building. And this painting is outside. All right. So John Smith gets captured by Powhatan. So here is the story. All right. And this is the story that, and we'll talk about what's true and what's not. He gets captured by Powhatan, which is true. He is taken and put in front of Powhatan, and Powhatan, and this is where it gets, decides to execute John Smith for invading his land. This probably not true at all. All right. And he lays his head on a rock, and this shows Powhatan. Powhatan wouldn't have done this. Powhatan was about 60 years old at the time. So one of the warriors, and this story comes from John Smith, holds a big rock up to smash John Smith's head to execute him here. And Powhatan's prized daughter, Pocahontas, and this is supposed to be her, comes running in and says, no, don't do it. Save his life. Let's work together and see if we can't come up with an agreement. Powhatan's like, okay, let's do that, and come up with an agreement where they're going to give him some food in exchange for some trinkets, and like glass beads really did the trick here early on. It's eventually going to be they're going to want guns. They're going to want other stuff from the colonists. But this is a famous story. And the reason it's a famous story is because John Smith tells everybody, this happens in 1607, he writes about it in 1624. So was that 17 years later? Carry the one. Yeah. 17 years later is when he writes about this. It never happened. Not like this, it didn't. He does show up and he does make a deal with Powhatan. Powhatan doesn't necessarily trust him, but Powhatan actually goes on the other extreme. Is like, you are like a son to me. All right. And Powhatan brings him into his family. And in a large part because Powhatan realizes this new group of people will be a lot better as an ally than an enemy. So he tries to be really nice to John Smith and brings him in. John Smith will write 17 years later about this execution attempt that happened, in large part because when he writes it in England at the time, because he's going to eventually be back in England at the time when that happens, he is trying to show people this new world and how they have tamed it, kind of his own fame, his glory, one of the G's, absolutely comes from this story. Here's why they know it didn't happen. Let me start by telling you why for a long time people have thought this was true. The Powhatan people, the Native Americans, do not have a written language. They do not have a sense of writing. That's not how they communicate. So there's nobody to combat against his writings for hundreds of years. All right. It's not until more modern times historians go back and they look at the information that we do know. First off, John Smith contradicts himself all the time. Secondly, understanding how the primogeniture works in the Native society understands Pocahontas. First off, Pocahontas is about 10. She's about 10 years old. She is not a grown woman. All right. So Pocahontas is a child. All right. Secondly, the reason Pocahontas is here, she's not like a princess yet, but it goes in the mother's line. So she's actually in no way, shape, or form any heir to any throne at all. Usually their children get sent away to other tribes and other stuff. The reason she's here is she's just a fun girl, basically. Like she's a trash talker. Like she'd talk trash to Powhatan, which nobody could do, and he'd laugh about it. Everybody's like, we're not going to kill you. No, okay, she'd talk trash to you. Powhatan, she's a very strong personality. So was she here when this interview took place? Possibly. All right. But she wouldn't be in the building, and this took place in a building in theory. Here's another reason why this didn't happen. If the Indians are going to kill somebody like John Smith, who was an invader, they don't do it with smashing their head in. They torture them to death, and it's brutal. Absolutely horrific, the ways they would torture you to death. They want to make it slow. They want to make it painful. They want to make a statement out of it. And then probably at the end, they're going to send his head back to Jamestown to let him know. Smashing somebody's head in was done, but that was typically one of the what would happen with treason. Like if you're a high warrior and you like tried to sell out your own tribe, then getting your head smashed would be a act of treason. So John Smith has probably seen that happen before and assumed that's how everybody gets executed there, and that's why he used it. He would never be in a position to have that level of execution happen. Especially Powhatan's not going to be present for it. So many things that this never happened, but it ends up being the lore that Pocahontas ends up saving him. The whole story of Pocahontas is basically fake. If you're in my honors class, you're going to write an essay on that. More about Pocahontas and the story and why it is in very large part make-believe. Anyway, so John Smith does make a deal with Powhatan. All right, and they are provided enough food to make it through the winter. All right, so even though they survived, the amount of diseases and dumb stuff and people killing each other and getting in fight. I mean, the number is the 144 that showed up the following spring. Only 38 were still alive. It was just over 100 of them just got. 106 died in that first winter here in Jamestown, and the natives are like, "What is wrong with these people?" And any of the stories told about John Smith, without him, none of this was going to happen. So John Smith is here for a few years. So what John Smith ends up doing is he is trusted by Powhatan. So he shows up in these small little villages, and he's like, Powhatan's like Powhatan calls him a son. Because he's a politician. He's trying to, So John Smith shows up in these villages, and he basically holds them at gunpoint and robs them of their food. This is how they get food. They're not growing food. They're not growing. He shows up and robs, he's robbing Powhatan tribes. And Powhatan's like, the king is like, what are you? And he's just a bully. John Smith is super aggressive. He'll say one thing to Powhatan and do the complete opposite. Now, is his whole entire goal here to look out for the colonists? Absolutely. Without him, they're going to die. All right. So in American history, John Smith is created as this awesome person, but he literally steals food that is keeping the Indians alive in order to take it for himself. So he's not a good guy, but he is important in the history of America for keeping them alive. Here's how we know he was so good as far as keeping Jamestown alive. He's here for a couple years, all right, and then an explosion happens in a canoe with gunpowder and accident. He gets really badly burned, and he has to go back to England. All right, so he gets on the next ship with the Virginia Company bringing in supplies, and the Virginia Company, they're like, hey, here's another ship for the Virginia Company. You know what the Virginia Company sends? More people to work, because they don't have any money. They can send more people and problem some money once they find gold. So you're out of food, and what does the Virginia Company send? Not food, but more people to feed. So it is really not going well. John Smith goes back to England. There's a big belief that he is going to be, that he's going to die, that he's not going to make the trip. The general belief at the time is that he died and didn't make it back. So Powhatan, he's interested enough John Smith survived. So when these other new leaders start coming in, Powhatan tries to make treaties with them, but it's like a revolving door of them. And he's like, dude, like, I can't make treaties if I can't meet your king. Like, the king in England. That's who I need to meet. I don't need to see these random people here that are leading Jamestown. So tensions between the natives and Jamestown really deteriorate. So much so, they stop being able to get food from the Native Americans at the time. The winter of 1609 to 1610, a couple years in, John Smith has left. So they're not doing any of the stuff they need to survive. It's called starving time. It is absolutely awful. People start killing and eating anything that they can. Cannibalism takes place. This here is an actual jawbone, and I don't know if you got my link here below it. I guess you can't see it in the video. But this just came out a couple years ago. They were able to prove it. It says the Smithsonian's National Museum and Natural History and archaeologists from Jamestown are announcing the discovery of the bones of a 14-year-old girl that showed clear signs that she was cannibalized. I mean, she was eaten by the other people in Jamestown. Evidence indicates clumsy chops to the body and head, and it appears a girl was already dead at the time, and stuff like the cuts on the jawbone, and then there's a bunch of other on the skeleton that clearly, so she was dead. She probably starved to death, all right? And then they had no food, so they cut her up and ate her. So the people at Jamestown are literally eating themselves. And it is as awful as you can imagine. There is literally a man gets executed because he killed his pregnant wife in order to eat her. Like during starving. It's called starving time for a reason. It is like absolutely horrific. And you're like, I thought you said there were no women and children. There were a few that showed up, not in that first wave, but a couple years in, yes, women did start showing up. But again, you're looking probably less than 5% of the population in Jamestown would have been women. So why was Jamestown, which was owned by the Virginia Company, struggling during the winter? And you have all the information you need to answer these in complete sentences with basically everything we've talked about so far. All right, so Jamestown changes hands. So Jamestown is going to end up making money, all right? And it ain't from finding gold, but they're going to find something else that's going to make bank. Tobacco. So John Rolfe, all right, he shows up here. He has some tobacco seeds that he shouldn't have, and he plants it here in the soil in Virginia, in the red clay soil, and the tobacco is just absolutely fantastic. The red clay soil that exists in North Carolina and Virginia with tobacco makes some of the best tobacco on earth up to present day. It's one of the few places on earth that have the soil composition with the climate in order to produce the style of tobacco that still gets grown here today, meaning North Carolina, Virginia region. So John Rolfe shows up and he plants this tobacco, and it just takes off. People will pay ridiculous amounts of money for it around the world. However, the problem with tobacco is that it requires a ton of manual labor. So you have like a bunch of warriors. You need actual workers. It also exhausted the soil, so you're going to need more land to do a crop rotation situation. So basically, you're starting from scratch, and the Virginia company is out of money. The Virginia company basically collapsed. It doesn't basically collapse. It does. It's just like we can't do anything else. So England has to make a decision here. They got a whole bunch of English citizens who are on the other side of the world. They could just pack them up and bring them back. That was an option. They could just leave them here, let them all die. Or England be like, fine, we own you now. We'll pick up the Virginia company slack. We own you, what you need. That is what England does. England is going to take over the colony. This is the greatest thing that can possibly happen for the colonies. England isn't hurting for money. England doesn't have the limited resources that the Virginia company does. So once England takes over, it makes it like a royal colony, like part of England. All of a sudden, supplies start coming in. While at the same time that tobacco has come out, England is going to start making a bunch of money off of Jamestown, off of farming. All right. So once Jamestown starts switching over to farming, Jamestown's going to change. They're not going to have these warriors and stuff coming over. They're going to have farmers coming over, have some families, but you need an absolute ton of workers over here, since this is going to be an agricultural community. And they're going to start trying to work with this new idea of indentured servants. So this is supposed to be at Jamestown, of them figuring out growing tobacco. And then why was it easier for England to conquer the problems that the Virginia company was facing with Jamestown? Deep pockets. All right. So just explain that in at least 2 sentences. Pause me if you need to. All right. Tobacco. Tobacco, this is the gold that gets found, more or less. This is the money that comes in. So in 1630, all right, over 1.5 million pounds of tobacco are being exported from Jamestown every year. So you're looking at 23 years after John Smith shows up, Jamestown is making bank. However, as much tobacco as you can grow, you can make money off of it. So you need tons and tons of workers. So the way England was going to deal with this, and the first attempt, and we'll talk more about this as we get further through this unit, it was the use of indentured servants. Now, indentured servants aren't slaves. They're not slaves, but they're not slaves. They're definitely not African-American slaves. The vast majority are not. I'm sure there's an example of everything that you want to find at some point in history. There's an asterisk next to everything. But the natives were not going to be slaves. There were attempts in other English colonies to do that. But as we talked about yesterday, even the Spanish realized that the natives are not effective slaves for multiple reasons. So indentured servants is basically what gets used in large part in America. So the indentured servants typically are something along the lines of you choose to put yourself into like slavery for a certain amount of years, and then once you're released, then you're given land and you can, you own land over here. So a lot of the people in the struggle with that primogeniture idea of the lack of the ability to own land because they're not the oldest child found a lot of value in that. So this is tobacco prices. Now, while this makes it look all like, oh my gosh, the fact that this is how expensive tobacco was, and this is when Jamestown was struggling, and then they're just going to take off because the amount of money that they made off tobacco absolutely made it functioning. And this doesn't mean, this is talking about producers. It means the actual farmers in Jamestown, not what it's being sold for. England is selling the tobacco for like crazy amounts up here. So England's making money, and we're going to talk more about this as we get through this, of how and why the colonists allowed themselves to get ripped off for so long. But we're not there yet. We're right in this area right here. All right. So how were tobacco farmers able to get the massive amount of labor needed to farm their lands? It's, as we got done talking about the stopgap between natives and actual slaves. There with indentured servants. So explain that here, and that's as far as we're going to get today.